Hello and welcome to GuyLogic. My name is Temco and this is Transport Fever, brought to you over from the folks over at Urban Games. This is their second title in about the same genre, Make a Transport Tycoon. Now their original title called Train Fever was released about 2 years ago and it got some middling reception. There were some issues with the train tracks, there were some issues with the mode. Overall it wasn't really complete. It was clear that the developers had a good idea of what they wanted to achieve, but they either didn't have the time, money, or knowledge to do so in the previous title. The question we're going to answer is whether or not they have succeeded in this sequel. Now, before we dive into the gameplay proper, I'm going to take a look at settings option and talk a little bit about PC performance. If you are not so inclined, you can press the annotation on screen and skip straight on ahead. For the rest of us, the settings menu. There are quite a few resolution options under sun. 16:9 as well as 16:10, 4:3 support, etc. All pretty complete. It should be noted that the game doesn't have a proper full screen or windowed mode. It does have windowed as resolution and then allows you to drag and drop the window size. I'm not the world's greatest fan of this because generally speaking games become quite a bit less stable when you do something like that. But I've not had too many issues with doing that in this title. So give or take, it is pretty okay. I'm just not too happy with them resorting to basic window functionality with hotkeys when they could have just made a button doing the same thing. That is a very minor gripe overall. Graphics-wise, you have anti-aliasing, which doesn't really tell you what kind, which is always a bit of a shame. I have been coming to the conclusion this is FXAA as best I can tell because it is pretty blurry on the edges. I'm not too sure, but that is as best I can tell. Then we have some ambient occlusion, HDR, rendering, reflections on the water surfaces, some nice shadows which you can change on and off in settings, the amount of detail you want to have on geometry as well as the texture quality overall. Now overall, the game doesn't really look that phenomenal. Especially once you start zooming in on things, it loses a lot of detail. Geometry-wise, the game looks really flat and it looks like the tile set was very basic at the best of times. The trains, trucks, buses, all of that does actually look pretty damn nice, even on zoomed in scale. But the various larger objects on the map don't really look that great. Moving on to audio settings. This is a weird one. The game does have quite a bit of audio and some options for that as well. But the problem is that the game doesn't respect those options in the options menu. It only respects those in the game proper, which means that if you're in the game and you load back out, you suddenly get bombasted by a cacophony of sound all over. The music also isn't really that particularly great. It fits the theme and it generally does do the job, but overall, from a music perspective, it is not that great. The various game sounds, though, are pretty decent, and they do fit quite nicely, even if they are a tad repetitive. The amount of times I've heard the same sound of a train coming into a station time and time again, and loading and offloading their goods, does get a little bit boring, but they're clear, they're focused, and they do convey what they need to convey. So no complaints on that, but no praise either. Moving on to controls, there are a ton of rebindable keys, and I would suggest you spend some time setting these up for yourself as you deem fit, because a large part of this game is about managing tracks, managing trains, managing rails, managing pathways, managing various menus, and getting acquainted with the options menu in regards to the key mapping does allow you to spend a lot less time clicking around various screens and subscreens and various menus and submenus to get to where you want to go. Then we have some keyboard and mouse settings such as sensitivity, edge scrolling, etc. and so on and so forth. Onward we go then over to the interface, which has a few changes as well. Now, some of these changes you can't actually change in game. Some of them you can. Again, a little bit weird, and it all boils down to a little bit of a technical incompetence on the game side. It just isn't as refined as it could or should be. That doesn't detract from the gameplay itself, but it does definitely detract from the PC experience and the overall smoothness of the gameplay experience. You can change the distance units, the speed units, the power units, the weight units, the force units, to whatever else you might want or deem fit. Then you have some little text or vehicle lifetimes or 3D effects, and then some option vehicle menus as well. And then you have some advanced options, which really doesn't say a lot. It just has autosave as well as crash reports. That is really it. And as I said, the game doesn't look particularly great when you zoom in, and part of that is the lack of detail on the ground. The second part of that is the way the UI is designed. So let's go ahead and dive into the game and talk a little bit about all of that, because the performance is pretty decent, but not perfect either, and I'll go into all of that as we dive in. Now the map you're seeing is the campaign map for Europe. And just a mission I played a little bit earlier that explains some of the core mechanics of the game. The free mode is also obviously available, and it has a variety of options you can customize as you deem fit for your gameplay experience. Now, before we dive into the intricacies of the gameplay itself, there are some things I want to touch upon that mostly go around the UI and the various ways the game presents information, as well as the various ways the game has evolved from its predecessor. Now, I haven't played the predecessor a large amount of time. I've only had a handful of hours in preparation for this review with the predecessor just to get a bit of a comparison. And there are definitely large numbers of improvements compared to the predecessor. But the core gameplay idea is still mostly the same. You build your transport empire and you manage that to make money. And if you don't like that kind of gameplay, if you do not like the transport tycoons, the roller coaster tycoons, the sim cities of this world, to lesser or greater extent, you will not enjoy this game because that is really what it is. Also, if you are a fan of the train simulation games, this is not exactly the kind of game for you because it's not only trains. A large part of the game is focused around trains, definitely, but it is still very focused also on making sure that you have supply networks and supply chains with trucks and boats and even airplanes if you're playing on a large enough map to warrant that. So there is quite a bit of variety here and quite a few layers to getting products created, shipped, and consumed through a variety of towns on your map. But the UI is a bit of a different story entirely. I am not a great fan of this UI. Now, it does perform most of the functions you'd expect it to do. It provides the information you might need at most of the given times. But there are just so many extra superfluous clicks and hovers and foldouts and tabs and menus and buttons involved just to get to the information that the game does have. It's not hiding it away from you on purpose. It's just cobbled together in a very inefficient way. A good example is, for example, getting to create a new track and then assigning vehicles to that track. You first have to plumb down the stations, then you select the track method, get a new line setup, then you select the stations you want to line for, but it doesn't allow you to use different various stations. So if you want to use trucks for a train station, that's not possible, but it still allows you to select truck and train stations. It doesn't have a nifty overview window where you can go station 1, station 2, station 3. No, it forces you to scroll around, zoom in and out all over the map to find that tiny little fiddly ass of a bus station right around the corner being covered by 2 buildings. To select it, to make a line, and then you have to go into a different building with a different menu that again pops up a different way to find a vehicle that you can then assign to that line, and then hopefully that will start going. There's a lot of clicks involved here, and while in some scenarios I can understand or even encourage a large number of additional clicks to provide more information, to go into very large numbers of detail, to go 2, 3, 4 layers deep to understand your finances. No, this is tons of clicks just for the basic of most basic operations that you'll be doing time and time and time and time and time again. And that's just not great UI design overall. Now, the game does have very nifty UI features. You'll see some of them on screen while the game plays in the background. It allows you to list down certain train tracks. It allows you to list down, say you want specific wagons, or if you want specific methods of transport. You can also tone it down based on where you are. It gives you handy overviews of what exactly you're transporting or exactly where your train is assigned to. It provides a ton of information in a ton of menus. It also allows you to track various train tracks, various buses, various methods of transport, and this all becomes increasingly important further down the line. Once you have a bit of more maturation and a larger network to manage, getting all of that information, absorbing all of that information becomes very important to know what is going on, because you'll have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 various lines running crisscross across your nation, doing a ton of things that all depend on one another to get the goods to where they need to go. That is sort of the point of the game. But up to that point, and even during that point, a lot of the UI actions you'll be doing are very tedious for no particular reason. So that is a bit of a drawback to the game. Now also, as I said earlier, the game has a lot of rebindable keys, but many of those are very weird from default settings. Rotating buildings before placing it using the M and End keys, just really weird. Why not just have it bound to a scroll mouse if you have something selected, like many other games have done over the past decades? Just seems like a bit of a weird choice, and that really stems from the fact that 1, this developer is still quite inexperienced, and 2, it's clearly an indie developer, and they may have been strapped for time to add some of those nice-to-have features that improve the gameplay experience but don't really add anything functionality-wise, because they have been really focused on getting a ton more fleshed out, detailed functionality in the game. So what is that functionality, you might ask? Well, one of the things you just saw earlier is the way that buildings now snap to a grid. And previously the game wouldn't curve, it wouldn't snap, and it wouldn't allow for much of a capture radius. What that meant was if you put down a train depot next to a city in the previous title, you would mostly just expect the entire city to be serviced by this one train depot. No longer is that the case. And on one end, this might seem a little bit tedious and annoying that you have to go with sub-routes and maybe some trucks in your city to transport goods from A to B within your city, or even bus stops to transport your people to the train station to transport them to a different city. And that is true, but the name in the game is Transport Fever, so that's kind of part of the fun. If you don't enjoy that sort of thing, you're not playing the proper game. So it's all about managing different tiers of transport, and the way they've done that with this snap to grid for your train stations, with this snap to grid for your buses that they go to the sidelines, the way they have this usage radius where you park your station next to a factory within a certain radius based on roads and distance, you will be able to instantly get that stuff from that factory onto your train tracks, and then the train will automatically load that in, provided you haven't set the train to only load a specific good. That is really, really good. And that translates also to the cities that now have 3 districts that thankfully use logical colors we're all used to. Yellow for your industry, green for your housing, blue for your commercial zones, etc., etc. Pretty much what we expect. And you can service these different industries independently. So that means you can send out a train to go deliver construction materials to a city, helping that city grow in terms of its industry, and you can also maybe spend some time with a train track in a different city, ferrying population back and forth and ferrying goods such as plastics and stuff back and forth, allowing you to grow your residential areas. So you can now specialize cities and towns in your map more to your extent and grow them to that goal. Really, really impressive that developers have been able to increase the complexity into a more gradual growth outward and inward from the various transport methods. If you're transporting something from one factory to a different factory, you are expected to provide a truck to transport it then in between those 2 factories as well. If you need to load something onto a shipping dock and you don't have a bus terminal or a truck terminal nearby, you're not going to get that loaded. And if you travel into a city and you don't have coverage to provide goods to a certain region, those goods are not going to be accessed by industry or residential or commercial areas. All of that is pretty damn great, and all of this does provide quite a bit of added complexity. Now the game is about, obviously, going through the time of about 200 years, you start in 1850, up to whenever you want in the future, and improving your technology, getting various trains, getting various trucks, going from carts to electric, going from steam to diesel, and so on and so forth. This goes gradually forward, and the game has some interesting ways of providing you with upgrade paths. You can pre-select whether you not want to replace a vehicle when it goes to the end of its life cycle or not, and you can extend that life cycle if you want to skimp on getting a new vehicle. Maybe you're really poor, maybe you don't need to buy a new one, maybe you can figure you can last 2 or 3 more years with that train before you upgrade it. You can manage quite a bit of stuff for yourself. And this only goes further exponentially, going from buses to trams to boats to airplanes. All of that really, really good. I really do enjoy that. The different ways the game has changed, though, is that it now focuses a lot more on the delivery mechanism and less about what you're delivering at any given time. Now, don't get me wrong, what you're delivering is still very, very important because different buildings in different zones and different regions need different goods delivered to them to provide either new construction materials, such as you need to get coal and bricks to get yourself some steel and construction materials and so on and so forth. You do need to get all of that in the proper locations, to the proper factories, and so on and so forth. That is still very important. But more important now is how you get it delivered to a specific location. Because there's 2 main things here that the game has done that really increase the level of complexity you allow for yourself in the game. One, primarily, is the way you build roads and tracks and the way the terrain works with and against you. Tracks, roads, and the various ways to build through terrain is ridiculously expensive because you can drag a road from A to B across, let's say, a kilometer on distance, and between those 2 spots, you could spend between 100,000 for a road and 50 million for the same road, all depending on whether or not there is elevation you need to go across, whether you need to dig a tunnel, maybe an aqueduct, maybe some crossings, maybe you need to clear out forest. There's lots of factors and considerations to be put in place when you're designing a road. And as you can see on this map in the background I'm playing, I built a large curvature on my train tracks, avoiding the hilly areas, avoiding needing to go through the hills or mountains, and reducing the cost for constructing my various tracks way down compared to having a direct line. And this is not a pure benefit situation. This is definitely a cost benefit situation because that means my train takes a longer route around, which is cheaper on the upfront investment, which is what I need to do because limited money. But obviously over the lifetime of the earnings you make, because earnings are mostly based on how fast you can get stuff to a location so it can get processed, is going to be lowered. So there is definitely a cost-benefit analysis you can do here and maximize whether or not you want to go through the mountain. Maybe you want to go around the mountain and then later build through the mountain to improve your productivity or improve your supply chain. All of that is a very nice added addition from the fact that different types of cost as well as different elevations impact the game so much. That is pretty phenomenal. And the same applies for roads. All of that pretty damn great. As I said, you have an area of influence. When you plumb down a factory and you ferry in between locations and you ferry in between various different spots, time is of the utmost importance. So having a single trail going from A to B in a direct line is always better than having one go around. Basically, if you're spending more time transporting goods, you're spending more time without getting a cash injection. And the game still says this truck has been running for a month, this is your cost for maintenance for this month, deal with it, and it will continue to tick that up. Obviously, if you have an old truck that's been running around for 20 years and it's about at the end of its lifetime, your maintenance cost is going to be significantly higher than that of a brand new one. So you need to phase out your trucks, you need to buy new ones, maybe you need to upgrade to a newer technology. Obviously, you want to upgrade your trains to newer trains once you go away from steam and start going to electric or diesel. You want to upgrade to these new trains because they're not going 30 kilometers an hour, they're going 160 kilometers an hour, which drastically reduces your travel time, which greatly improves the benefit of transporting goods. But again, their maintenance cost is higher, and again, you have that cost-benefit analysis. On this part of the game, I have no complaints at all. This is all really good. Other than that, though, there is some very large improvements that are spread across a large number of minor improvements. The way construction works now is that if you plumb down a station in a specific spot, it will try to destroy any residences that are blocking it. The way it tries to autocorrect for elevation or curvature of the road. The way it automatically creates railroad crossings if you have railroads crisscrossing a road. All of these things are pretty good to have overall and do reduce the amount of unnecessary micromanagement you need to do. But there is still one major negative to the game, because even if you provide yourself all the time in the world to make proper decisions, to think ahead at what you're building, what you're planning, what you're playing 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line in your game, even then, the game doesn't always provide you the information you need. The biggest example I have of this is that you can set certain train carts to only do a specific resource. The problem is you can never change this again, so as long as those various units are in the game and as long as you use them, you will never be able to change what resource they use, except the one you set initially. Obviously, you can also set to automatic, and then it tries to intelligently decide which resources are needed based on the stop it's going to and its route it's traveling, as well as what is needed or delivered in those various spots. And the game does a pretty good job of that, but the fact that you can't edit the manual configuration does detract a little bit from that, definitely. And that is again mostly a UI issue. Another thing is the way you manage stations. The game still allows you to select stations that you can't interact with because maybe you're setting up a truck line, and it still allows you to select train stations and just says, okay, I've added this train station to this line. I'm not sure what you want me to do with it because I'm not going to do anything, but here is a line that doesn't work. And there's a couple of more things like that. The game also has a couple of issues with the various factories deciding when they want to switch on to active after they have been enabled by having a track next to them or having a truck depot next to them and stuff like that. That's all a little bit fiddly and finicky. But overall, this is a massive improvement over the previous title. It's not perfect by any means of the imagination, but it is really, really fun. There is one thing though left to talk about, and this is graphical fidelity. Now, in games like this, I don't really harp on graphics all too much. Most of the time, the games look decently okay, and the situation here is no different. The shame of it is though that even on the maximum of maximum settings, there is still a tremendous amount of pop-in. Even if you are following in first-person mode, which you can do, or you snap to a train or truck and you follow along in that mode, there is so much pop-in that is not even in the distance with things going into field of vision. It's directly in front of you as the high-definition textures, as high definition as they are, try to take over. And that is not okay in my opinion, because it really detracts from the gameplay experience quite a bit when the very pretty looking train that looks all nice and has a nice little logo on the side that you put there and decided for your company suddenly runs through a forest, and while you're looking at your pretty train that is fully rendered and looks nice, the trees start morphing from these green blobs into actual trees. It really does detract quite a bit. and I don't really like that. Other than that though, there isn't a large amount of stuff to complain about except that all the grasslands, once you zoom in, look really dated. If you look at the various forests and hilly areas and you have these rock textures and you have a town interspace and it's maybe a river and a little bit of beach, that looks pretty great. But if you have this open area on the map and you zoom a little bit into that, you can really see that the grass and ground textures aren't that great. They're very repetitive, they're very flat, and they don't really add much definition to the various areas. There are some color differentiations based on height and the like that, but it doesn't really come to life quite well. And that, again, is a bit of a shame. It's clear that developers haven't put a large amount of effort or additional time into fine-tuning these extra details, such as the shore having waves or stuff like that. It's functional, and that's what they focused on, definitely. And that brings me to the last point. The AI in this game is okay in terms of deciding what routes to take, what goods to bring forth, and where to move from A to B, and how to upgrade its own cities, and the like. Because mostly you don't really have control over that aspect. You can't go and say, I want this city to be upgraded instantly now, I want to get this residential area. No, you have to provide the goods, and they do it themselves. But where the game is terrible at is pathfinding for AI NPCs in towns. You have a bunch of simulated NPCs and a bunch of simulated people going in your town, walking across roads, going across sidewalks, waiting on the buses, and so on and so forth. And they generally just stand in front of a clustered area, wait on the road, move back and forth. There's no simulation of lives here. Everybody moves from A to B to C to D, and there's no real further simulation. It's all just filler to make your screen seem alive. And that is a bit of a shame, because the game does do that for the various trucks and boats and trains you are in control of. It just doesn't do that for the other things you do not have direct control over. And again, graphically, the game isn't that strong, and this shows in quite a few aspects, from the various buildings, from the various ground textures, tree textures, shadow textures, lightning effects, the way it does earth sculpture when you place a road and it has to be elevated, or the area around it has to be shaped differently. It doesn't look phenomenal, but it does provide a massively interesting multi-tiered gameplay experience if you are interested in providing more of a tycoon or travel experience. Manage your own travel company, manage your transportation company, and manage every detail of that company while you're at it. It's a pretty decent game overall, and if you are so interested, you can check it out on Steam. It comes out on November 8th, and there's a link in the description if you are so inclined. If you like this video, press the like button below. If you didn't like this video, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and tell us what you think of the game in the comments down below. And until then, I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogic.